Great, so welcome everybody, and this is actually the fourth in our series of 4 web discussions, and this one is a little bit different in that I'm hosting it, but it's still focused in on data, and I'm very, very excited about our discussion today. We're going to provide an overview of metric sets. And why isn't this, sorry. And I'm very excited because we have a couple of different speakers that you've not heard from today, talking about what really is surveillance and providing an overview of various metric sets. And then you're going to be receiving an overview on the core metrics, and then of course, opportunity for questions. So today, very excited that we have 2 great colleagues with me. The first one is Stephen Teutsch, and he is an independent consultant and an adjunct professor at the Fielding School of Public Health at UCLA. I've done some work with him here at the Public Health Institute, and he's also a senior fellow at the Schaefer Center at USC. He was formerly the Chief Science Officer at LA County Public Health and Executive Director of Outcomes Research and Management Program at Merck. He's retired from the CDC. He kind of just fit that in, in all this other stuff. And where he was the director of the Division of Prevention, Research, and Analytical Methods. I'm going to actually put the rest of his bio on the slide so that you can have that as background. But very exciting. He's a dear colleague, and he's very, very great to have around. Good thought partner. Then we also have Danielle Rodriguez. And so Stephen is in LA today. Danielle is in Seattle. And she is recently just received her PhD, yay, and she's a research scientist for the Public Health Institute, where she's supporting projects for the Cancer Registry of Greater California and the Survey Research Group. She is the lead epidemiologist for our contract with the National Cancers Institute Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results Program, or SEER. So with that, we are in great company today. I'm going to turn this over to Steve. And Steve, I'm going to drive the slides, if that works for you. Just starting off, this is Rebecca's slide. I wanted to include this, is that just recognizing we're all in different places. So some of the information that we're sharing today, you may be very well versed at, and others, this is like the first time that you're hearing it. And so hopefully it will be useful. So there we go, Steve.
Great, thanks so much, Sue. And I'll dive right in. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. And I'll be covering a number of topics on surveillance and some background on metric sets, which Sue said may be new to some of you. Hopefully it's old hat to most of you. So public health surveillance is one of the basic tools that folks in governmental public health use, and it has broader applications as well. Basically, what we're talking about here is the ongoing systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health-related data that are used for planning, implementation, and evaluation in public health practice. The idea is that one has timely data that are analyzed and interpreted and then integrated into the practice of public health and shared with the stakeholders who need to use it. And so the final link in the surveillance chain is the actual application of the data to prevention and control. So it's a much more active process than simply having data and publishing it. Next slide. Surveillance has a number of uses. A few of them are shown here. One is just to understand the magnitude of health in a population, but it's often used as a sentinel event to detect problems as they occur in the community, and certainly to detect changes. it helps to understand the distribution and extent of a problem, not only geographically, but which parts of the population are subject to that, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, sociodemographics, or other variables. It also allows us to generate hypotheses about what causes these events, and therefore to develop control and prevention strategies. And lastly, of course, once one has programs and policies in place, it allows us to evaluate them. Next slide. So for the purposes of some of the discussion today, I think it's helpful to talk about what we mean by a population. And that may seem like kind of old hat, but for those of you who are in the clinical world primarily, you'll realize from this, what I'm about to say, that what a population is in that context differs from that of what we often use, how we often use the term in public health. So when I use the term total population, I am talking about the entire population within what is usually a geopolitical unit, such as a county or a city or other jurisdiction. But what we often find is that people are not talking about, when they say population health, they're often talking not about the total population, but some subpopulation, such as the individuals who are part of a clinical care system or part of a managed care organization, or actually in schools or an employed population or other group. These are subpopulations, but what we're primarily concerned with here is the entire population. And it is often more than just the sum of these subpopulations, as you can see in this figure. Next slide. So hopefully this is something that all of you have thought deeply about, and that is, what do we mean when we say a healthy community, since that's what we're trying to achieve. And this graphic grows out of the Sustainable Growth Council here in the state, which really laid out a wonderful picture of what a healthy community has. And I'm not going to test you on all of these components, or I'm not going to recite them all to you. But first of all, it meets the basic needs of all in terms of transportation, food, access to care, and all of the kinds of things that we need every day to function. Then it talks about the quality and sustainability of the environment, by which we often mean the physical environment. So it's not just the absence of toxins, but it's also the presence of the kind of places where we can thrive, green and open spaces, that there's an aesthetic, and that there's affordable, sustainable energy, and so forth. Third is there are adequate levels of economic and social development, so that it provides economic opportunities for everyone and is supportive of the development of healthy kids and adolescents, as well as adults and seniors. We're looking here at many of the things that we care.
Oh, jeez.
The high quality education, housing, and many of those other kinds of things. And lastly, we talk about the health and social equity, so that we have supportive relationships that are respectful, where people are engaged in their communities and provide a safe, healthy environment. Next slide. So next question is, what is a metrics set? What are we talking about here? And when I use the term metric set, I'm talking about an organized set of measures that can be used to assess and improve population health and health equity. And when I talk about a core metric set, I'm really talking about a parsimonious set of such measures, so that it's not exhaustive. You can wrap your head around it. It's finite, but it provides a quantitative indication of the current status on the most important elements in a given field. And it can be used as a standardized and accurate tool for informing, comparing, focusing, and monitoring and reporting change. You got ahead of me, Sue, but we're good.
I know.
Good. So,
it does it when you don't want to.
Next slide. So good metrics themselves really are intended to be compelling. They not only reflect the most important things about our health, but also the most important drivers of health, the things that actually produce the health. And perhaps most importantly, they stimulate communities and individuals to take action to improve health. Next slide.
Steve, for those of you that are there, could you just put yourselves on mute? Because I'm hearing some background noise while Steve's talking. Thank you.
Okay, so this slide shows some desirable characteristics of these core metric sets. And the things at the bottom are the kinds of things most of you probably think a lot about when you look at metrics. The individual metrics that we use every day, that they're understandable, they're compelling, that they're technically sound, that they're available and can provide useful information. But I think it's also useful to think about the things at the top of the slide, which are what are some of the characteristics of metric sets themselves. One is they should be broad and inclusive, what we call comprehensive here. They're parsimonious, they're limited, there are a finite number of them so that it's not an endless task, but you can wrap your head around them in real terms. They should be easily understood, and that they should promote population health, health equity, and the kind of changes that we want to see in our health systems. And when I use health systems, I use that term very, very broadly, as you'll see. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some sets of metrics, but before I do that, I want you to realize that what is measured depends on the purpose and the perspective of the users of these metrics. And so they were developed for a variety of different purposes. Some are to deal with the problems and issues in population health. Some are intended to be more clinical. Some have a broader construct around well-being. You'll see some around economic issues, and some more are used for comparison across jurisdictions, and still others for ranking. So they're not all of a type. Next slide. So one of the ones that you probably are most familiar with are the leading health indicator topics from Healthy People 2020. And you'll see that they are a list of health issues primarily, and indeed many of them are actually very clinically oriented. Clinical preventive services, maternal infant health, mental health, so forth. And while others are a bit broader in focus, they still deal primarily with clinical issues and medical problems and behaviors. Next slide. One of my favorite sets of measures is the county health rankings, which I hope all of you have had a chance to look at. And this framework, I think, is particularly helpful in thinking about the problem. So this framework basically has three major components. One is the health outcomes, and those are defined as length of life or life expectancy, actually measured here as years of potential life loss, and then the quality of life. And those are held in equal parts, 50-50. The health factors are actually the things that drive those health outcomes, and they're divided into the four components you see here. About 40% of the health factors are due to social and economic concerns, 30% health behaviors, 20% clinical care, and 10% physical environment. And it's helpful, I think, to hold those numbers more or less in your head, and not that they're absolutely precise, but it gives you some sense of the relative importance of these things in actually driving health. Then at the bottom, you see policies and programs, which are the things that we do to improve those health factors. And those aren't elaborated on here, but you can find out lots more about those on the county health ranking site itself. Next slide. As you could tell, the county health rankings are available at the county level. America's Health Rankings uses a slightly different framework, but since they work closely together with the county folks, you'll see some similarities, but these are designed to be used at the state level. And they've divided the major factors as community and environment, behaviors, clinical care, and policy. All of which are the things that drive health outcomes. And if you look at their metrics, they fall into the buckets that you actually see there on the left. Next slide. We have many more examples at the end if we have time to get to them and there's interest. But in the interest of time, let me talk just about some of the challenges of these core metric sets. One is parsimony versus completeness. it's nice to have a fairly small set of measures, but the trade-off, of course, is they don't cover all the aspects that stakeholders really care about. One of the ways around this is to develop some composite measures so that, instead of having education as a proxy for social determinants, we actually have a social determinants measure that's made up of many components that may be related to stigma and segregation, housing, education, and so forth. On the other hand, there's a virtue in parsimony itself, which does promote a certain level of focus and allows people to wrap their heads around these things. There's a paucity of good equity measures. We care about equity greatly, and health equity in particular, but what we currently see is primarily an attempt to analyze data by subgroup rather than having an overall measure of equity itself. One of the challenges, of course, is that while we all care primarily about the outcomes, those outcome measures generally change too slowly to be very useful in an operational sense in terms of decision making. So one of the things that we have is some standard measures here to measure progress, and so there are process measures to enable us to do that. I've given you 2 examples here of three examples, and there are many more out there. But because there's no real authoritative leadership in any of these things, we see a proliferation, which I'm afraid leads to a certain level of confusion. And lastly, there's a challenge with the availability of data at the requisite level, so that what's available at the national level may not be available internationally, and certainly what's available nationally isn't necessarily available at a state or local or institutional level. So many of these things need to be adapted for the level of analysis that's relevant. Next slide. So metrics are nice, but what we care about is doing something to improve things. So we want to link these metrics to some type of action. I mentioned the County Health Rankings website, which has a set of roadmaps, which helps to do that. Healthy People also has a list of interventions that tie to each of the measures that are in Healthy People, all of the objectives as well as the leading health indicators. And then there's taking action, which includes the actions and systems changes in the actual methods. There's a nice Robert Wood Johnson Foundation framework, for example. And then we need to, of course, develop more detailed measures for specific interventions so we can track them. Next slide. An Institute of Medicine report on quality measures for the leading health indicators really tries to tie some of these things together, so that when one looks at a big health outcome, such as the one on the right here, long, healthy lives for all, which is what we might subscribe to as part of Healthy People, then there are a variety of healthy conditions, the behaviors, access to care, and so forth. A set of interventions, policies, programs, and services that drive those, and then the upstream resources and capacity necessary to do them. So the next slide shows how this might play out for a specific thing that I assume many of you are actually working on. So if you look at an outcome such as tobacco smoking, you can see some of the outcome measures here in terms of tobacco-related diseases and health-adjusted life expectancy. Then you can go to the next level up and look at the healthy conditions, such as what we want to achieve to do this, reducing prevalence of tobacco use and exposure to secondhand smoke, things that promote those, such as some of the policy measures, increasing cost, decreasing availability of tobacco, so forth. And then we have clinical measures, increasing the number of tobacco users who successfully stop, and trying to influence more negative cultural and social attitudes and change those norms. You can look at the interventions that are used to achieve those, and then the resources and so forth upstream that are necessary to be able to implement and sustain those interventions. All the things that are sort of in the purple and green are things that we can develop very specific metrics around. And in your community, for instance, if you were to undertake this, you would probably be choosing things that are particularly relevant or to your community, or that have the greatest feasibility. So you would probably pick from a long list of things to do, and then be able to develop a set of metrics from a diagram such as this that are very relevant to your community. Okay, next slide. So in sum, you know, what we think of as the best measures are the ones that drive the greatest health improvement and greatest health equity. And many of the greatest opportunities, as you are all aware, lie outside of the traditional health sector and in the systems and policy change arena. We need to be able to link those measures to something we can do about them, the interventions, policies, programs, and then they need to be part of a collective action and quality improvement process that allows us to continue to make progress. So with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Sue and Danielle.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. Before we just transition, I just want to see if there's any questions that any of you have. You can either put them in the chat box or just speak them out. Any questions for Steve?
I must have had a lucid day.
Yes. Great. I'm going to transition now. So I'm going to talk about two other metric sets just very, very briefly before we turn it over to Danielle. So one initiative that you may be aware of is, and it's California based, and it's called the Let's Get Healthy Initiative. And this started in 2012 with a governor's task force. And they set out to create a 10-year plan to make California the healthiest state in the nation. And as a result of that, they developed 6 goal areas with a variety of different indicators to measure progress towards achieving that goal. And I have the link here for this site, and you will be getting these slides. So this shows the, there's kind of 2 areas. It's what would it look like if California is the healthiest state in the nation is the first question. And so they kind of looked at this first area as foundational. So really looking at things across the lifespan. So thinking about healthy beginnings, managing chronic disease and end of life care, kind of this hospice. In that health across the lifespan. And then the next question is, what's it going to take? Like, what will it take for California to be the healthiest? And so this is where there's a set of kind of strategies here in the pathways to health. So redesigning the health system, creating healthy communities, and lowering the cost of care. And so for this, the reason why I'm telling you is there's these 2 strategic directions. There are 6 goals, and within those goals are 30 priority areas, but there's 39 metrics that are available. And one of the pieces that we're going to be sharing with you is there's actually a crosswalk that we've done between these metrics and the next set of metrics that we just want to share with you is the California County profiles. So each California county has a profile. It's on this website, and you actually can go to a county and you can download an Excel spreadsheet. And these metrics are a little bit different in that they're morbidity and mortality metrics. And there's some around like low birth weight. There's some kind of kind of low birth weight, those kinds of things. It's an interesting set of data, but because that's available for each county, we thought that you might be interested in that. And I think Rebecca shared this as well. And we actually crosswalked the 3 metric sets just so you can see kind of the differences between those. So now I'm going to turn this over to Danielle, who is in Seattle, who's going to provide an overview of the core metrics.
All right, thanks, Sue and Steve. So I am now going to jump into the core metrics data. I was tasked with compiling all the data for all the various sites and counties. And so, as many of you probably know, the Blue Shield of California Foundation, the California Healthcare Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation with the Institute of Medicine created a committee to identify core measures for health and healthcare. And so they came up with a 4-domain framework, which was based on healthy people, care quality, lower cost, and engaged people. And within these 4 domains, they proposed a set of 15 standardized measures that will have recommendations for the application at every level and across various sectors in the health field. So ultimately, the committee was hoping that this streamlined set of measures could provide consistent benchmarks for health progress across the nation and improve system performances in highest priority areas that the county or various sites deem are most important for their individual needs. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Great. And Danielle, can I just add, so Steve, who you heard from earlier, was actually on this committee that was convened by IOM, so he has much expertise around this particular issue. So.
Yes, great. So I'm not going to go over all these measures individually, but these are some of the examples of the measures that you'll find in the data that will be provided to you. So it's going to look at different metrics for life expectancy, healthcare access, healthcare spending, community engagement, healthy communities. So you'll be able to get more information on these once the data is sent to you, but this is just a brief introduction on what you'll get. Next slide. Okay, and I mean, just these are the different health accelerated sites that the data was compiled for, and we are only able, with the data, a lot of times you can only get it at the county level, so the data was pulled for each county, for each of the sites, so there are some duplicated counties. Next slide. So now I am going to attempt to share my screen to show you some of the data, an example of the data you'll see, and that way I can explain it a little bit more in detail.
Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so yes. And I will show, here it is. Okay, can everyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so this is, I think, an example of Yolo County's data, but everyone will get similar data that looks like this. And one limitation I do want to bring up is that a lot of times the smaller counties, some of the data will be missing for those counties just due to the county size. So I've included all the different tables for each county, but some of the tables might not be filled out due to sample size, but it's indicated for each county when that is a limitation. And the data you'll receive will be broken down into the 4 domains. We'll have the healthy people, it'll be care quality, care cost, and engaged people. So within these different tabs, you'll be able to see the different measures and indicators throughout and for each county. I'm not going to go through every single one, but this is just an idea of, it'll show where the data came from, the results, and it'll group them into all the different domains. So I just want to stop right now for questions before, I don't think I have too much more to go. Are there any questions regarding this so far?
And Steve, I don't, Danielle, if it's okay, Steve, I don't know if there's anything else just regarding this particular set of metrics that you wanted to add in addition to what Danielle has shared.
Right. So I think it's maybe helpful to see what the perspective was of the people who were on this committee. So the committee was presented with the 4 domains that Danielle outlined. And when they say healthy people, those are primarily population level measures. and deal with sort of outcomes like life expectancy and infant mortality, so forth, as well as a lot of the behaviors and things of that nature, social determinants. But because it was pretty clinically oriented, there was a lot of interest in the quality of care and cost of care, and that's the reason for those two other domains. The ones that turned out to be, I think, most challenging were the ones on engagement. And you'll see there are measures here for individual engagement, meaning how engaged people are in their care primarily, as well as community engagement, sort of the vibrancy of communities. But the metrics for those latter two are actually at a very early stage. So you'll see some that were chosen in the materials that Danielle is going to provide to you. But in many cases, you may have other measures of them that you can use locally that are, and that hopefully will become more established over time. Metrics.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
So I'm going to stop sharing mine, and you could put the presentation back up.
Oh, okay.
But I only have one more slide, so I can speak to it right now. So about within the next 24 hours, each site will receive their data from Kylie Gallington. She'll send the data in individual emails to the different sites and be able to answer any questions. And I'm happy to answer questions, but she'll be the main contact once the data is sent.
Mm-hmm. So Danielle and Steve, I just wanted to add one other thing. So this last year, Steve and I, and I'm not sure if Suzanne Ryan Abera from SRG is on, but we worked on a project to actually test out these metrics in 2 communities in the state of California. One was Fresno and the other was Monterey. What I found really interesting, so the work that I did, and actually Dana was with me on this, is that we did a lot of stakeholder interviews, kind of sharing them the metric set. And a lot of them had some challenges and difficulty because their orientation maybe is to have more data as opposed to less data. So the idea of 15 indicators that a group of people could come together, they got it, but it was really hard to say, well, I care about people who die from pneumonia. Why do you have this mortality measure? And so I think, just to reemphasize what Steve was saying, right, there's this, it's really to drive action, and it doesn't mean that your local ACH, if you choose to do something like this, couldn't still collect, their different measures of mortality, for example, but that could you agree to a metric set like this one that you would move towards collective action on. So I just wanted to add that because I thought it was really interesting and really a challenge, for some of them. So Danielle, do you want me to speak to this, or do you want to speak to this?
It would be great if you can.
Yeah, and so basically this is just something that we did as part of our work where we laid out, so you've heard about a variety of different metric sets, and because we're giving you the core metrics set, and we did that work funded under Blue Shield of California, which is one of the CACHI initiative funders. And so they asked that we actually collect all of the data and make sure that you had it all. And then the middle set, is the Let's Get Healthy, and then you have the county profiles. So what we tried to do was to see if there was any overlap at all, and there's really kind of not a lot, which is interesting. Which is interesting. I don't know, Steve, if you have any comments, or Danielle, on this, just in terms of the lack of overlap or not, and the amount of it.
Well, I think it's important to know that, sort of the ones that we see on the right there, the county health profiles, are a much more traditional health-oriented, disease-oriented kind of approach. So there's no right or wrong answers here, but they really are intended for somewhat different purposes. Sue, I would like to add one other thing about what we did in Fresno and Monterey. And because we know that no set of measures is going to meet everybody's needs, and particularly since communities do differ in not only their circumstances, but perceptions of problems, we actually gave them some license to add one or two additional measures to that core set so that they could tailor them a bit to their own situations. So in Fresno, for example, one of the key problems that they were facing were, at least in the group we were working with, dealt with transportation issues, and in Monterey, they were particularly interested in safety. So we did add components for those too, so that they're, to make these things a little bit more tailored to the individual locale.
Mm-hmm. And just to tag on in Fresno, what was really interesting is that they, picked the data that they did and they actually used that, with some planning with their county commissioners. And so it was actually a tool. There's actually a live stories site that was created in both of those. So you're going to hear more about the notion of live stories or data visualization when we have the call about the opportunities on the health data ambassadors. So that's another way that you can actually take like a set of metrics, put them into a platform where you're actually telling stories that is much more engaging than, here's just the data, right? I think that was really useful. So I see that Suzanne Ryan Ibarra is on. So she's been on maternity leave. And so yay, she's back and very excited. And she was very instrumental in the Core Metrics project. I don't know, Suzanne, if there's anything else you'd like to share before we move on.
Thank you, Sue. I'm not sure if my audio works.
It is, I can hear you.
Oh, great. Good. Nothing else I'd like to share, just that, I look forward to working with all the sites on the live stories piece, which was a bit of an endeavor for our previous project, but very worthwhile.
Great. So what we have at the end of this presentation is a variety of different other metric sets. I don't know that we not necessarily want to go through all of them, but again, this is going to be posted onto the website, so you'll be able to download this. I just want to see if there's any questions, about any of this stuff, any of the utility or anything else before we stop. You can either use the chat box or anything else. Like I know some of you are interested in outcomes. I know Larry, not to pick on you, but the other day you were talking about outcomes research. I don't know if there's other pieces. You've got Stephen here, who's a captive audience.
I think these data sets, particularly some of the indices, are going to be valuable as we develop the measures that we want to use in Riverside.
Great.
We want to develop measures of social return on investment. And I was just, for what I could read on the screen, some of them were pretty tiny for my old eyes, but once we get hold of them, I'm sure they're going to be useful. Thanks.
Stephen, I'm wondering if you would just take a minute. The other day I sent out a note to the sites and talked about the win-win, that there's anything you might, just think in terms of the research that you've done there. I know it's maybe a little off topic, but not necessarily would you mind sharing just a bit about that?
No, I'm happy to do that. So this is a project at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health Center for Health Advancement, and we call it Win-Win for a number of reasons, because we're looking at interventions that have important health effects and usually have benefits in other sectors as well, whether particularly criminal justice or education, housing, things like that, and have reasonable returns to government, so that they represent government, the kinds of programs and policies that can be put into place by governments, usually at a local or county or state level, and provide good value to them in terms of real return on investment. So we've looked at a relatively large number of interventions and actually developed models that can be adapted ultimately for different geographies. So in Los Angeles County, we often look at them even at the zip code level. Some are in by school districts, as have been done in San Antonio, and so forth. And they include a variety of programs: paid parental leave, obesity programs in schools, housing improvements to reduce asthma in Philadelphia, and so forth. So these models, if you will, are on the website. I can never remember what it is, but if you just Google UCLA Win-Win, it'll come up, and you'll see those. You can then link to the models and the methodologies and so forth. We don't want these things to be an academic exercise. That's the last thing that we want. In fact, they're designed to be used by communities to provide some useful information to them that can be used by stakeholders and policymakers to provide some reasonably objective information about the value of these different interventions. So we definitely invite you to look at those, and they're a set of evidence-based interventions. Most provide good value, but you can use them to see how they might apply in your locales, and hopefully some of them will be useful enough that you can use to drive some change.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. I sent out an email with a variety of different resources, and that was one of them in there. So there's a link to the website here. Questions from any of you at all? I think I don't, we have a couple of minutes, but, we don't have to stay on if we don't need to. I can share, Stephen, I don't know if we just want to go through these just quickly. These are other metric sets that we just thought you might want to know about. So I don't know if you have anything to say on this one, Stephen.
Well, I think this is, you'll be able to see these when Sue posts all these slides. They were really designed to just give you a different sense of how others have put together a set of core metrics. So this one is from AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, and most important is to see how they constructed the different domains. This is obviously much more socially oriented and oriented towards things that matter. Obviously their perspective is people over 50, but also more broadly. So this is one, and if you look it up, you can find the data. There's an organization called the Healthy Communities Network. It may have changed its name since it was taken over, I believe, by Xerox. But basically, they provide local communities with the ability to create their own websites that provide a much, much, much deeper set of data, and it's all automated and updated so that you can use that once you establish one of these networks. This one's one we happen to do for Los Angeles, and you can pick out a handful of key metrics or key domains that you want to look at, and then you can also drill down and look at the interventions that can be used to influence those different dimensions. There are, I don't know how many, probably over 200 measures in there now. Many of them are really health related, and many of them are more oriented towards social and physical environments. So it's was actually begun here in by the state of California, I believe it's Sonoma County, and so it's a nice tool for those of you who are interested in securing such a thing. Gallup, you all know, of course, is the polling agency. Healthways is a private firm, and they developed a well-being index, which looks at these dimensions. And I think it's important that I think we're moving generally more in the sense of, instead of health-related quality of life, we're looking at well-being more broadly, which really talks about sense of purpose, and people may call that, religion, but I think sense of purpose is more on target. Social relationships, financial security, traditional health and relationships, again, providing a broad sense of important things that are relevant to well-being. A National Equity Atlas, and again, you can Google any of these and get more detail and actually find some of the data that looks at these components that you see here that deal with readiness, preparedness, education, connectedness, and economics.
Great.
Is that the last one, I think?
I think, well, then there's information about the core metrics. It's just extra.
Right. So the vital signs, it was the IOM report that Danielle talked to you at more length about. And if you go to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, which is what it's called now, and look at vital signs, you'll find the whole report.
Mm-hmm. And then here's just another visual of the domains and the metrics, that's available. So clearly there is no shortage of data and metric sets, right? So that's that, just in terms of what we wanted to share with you today. I don't know if there's any questions at all. If not, I'm going to post the recording and we'll post the slides and they will be available. Quiet group today.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, well, thank you. Hopefully this was helpful to you all. And I will expect you're probably, going to be waiting anxiously by your computers for this data set. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out about what does it mean? What do I do with it? What are the next steps? Any of that. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Okay,
Thanks, Sue. Bye-bye.
Bye.